Picture the bustling streets of New York City in the summer of 1910. The skies in those days were still a wild frontier, and the roar of an airplane engine echoed as a rare, almost supernatural sound. The Wright brothers had achieved their historic flight just 7 years earlier, on December 17th of 1903, and aviation lingered in its fragile infancy with rickety biplanes struggling to skim the clouds during daylight hours, let alone challenge the darkness of night. And so as dusk settled over the city on August 30th, lights began to flicker on like distant stars, and crowds gathered in Madison Square Park, that green oasis surrounded by towering early 20th century structures. Suddenly, a peculiar whirring pierced the evening air, a mechanical hum descending from above, drawing every gaze skyward. Eyes fixated on the majestic Metropolitan Tower, its illuminated windows cutting through the gloom like a beacon in fog. And then, from the inky void, a long black silhouette emerged, carving through the heavens. What secrets did it conceal in its shadowy form? As the object drew closer, its shape sharpened into something inexplicable, an aircraft, sleek and ominous, far surpassing the crude designs of the era. Witnesses desperate for an explanation labeled it a biplane, the only flying machine they knew. It glided past the tower with unnatural grace, then banked sharply, its edges etched against the glowing windows. Yet the display escalated from there. In a brazen defiance of gravity and common sense, it dove into heart-stopping swoops, skimming so low over the park that onlookers held their breath, convinced it would graze the treetops and plunge into the crowd. Would disaster strike, or would this enigma ultimately reveal its purpose? Now, the New York Tribune captured the shock and wonder the next day on August 31st. Quote, "It was heard before it was seen. The whirring sound of a motor high in the air caused many necks to be craned toward the Metropolitan Tower at 8:45 o'clock, when a long black object was seen flying through the air toward the tower. The vague bulk, as it came into nearer view, took on the semblance of a biplane. It swung past the tower, then turned and described one graceful circle after another around the illuminated structure, its outline standing out clear in the lights from the many windows." End quote. And as if mocking the city's confusion, the mystery returned to the air the following night, precisely at 9 p.m., and over the same park it repeated its perilous maneuvers. The Tribune's September 1st edition delved into every known pilot and aircraft, scarce, albeit in that era. Biplanes were too delicate to fly safely here, unfit for Manhattan's vicious updrafts. And night flying represented a deadly risk few would attempt. Yet this craft performed it flawlessly. And so questions swirled: how could this aircraft and pilot defy the limits of flying at this time? Eyewitness accounts only amplified the intrigue, and details conflicted wildly. Some witnesses reported 2 red lights and others 3 green lights. Who or what was commanding this spectral machine? And the Tribune, blending frustration with perhaps whimsy, suggested the pilot might, quote, "drop his name to earth in an otherwise empty bottle," end quote. But no such clue ever materialized. The Phantom vanished, leaving lingering questions and concerns. Who was this daring inventor that was testing human boundaries? Or was it a darker omen of unidentified aerial phenomena yet to come? Now, as aviation in 1910 teetered on the edge of experimentation, fragile wood and fabric biplanes were powered by basic engines, and they were capable of only short, low-altitude flights at speeds up to around 68 miles per hour. And night operations remained so rare and perilous due to poor visibility and very primitive technology. Still, there were some amazing aviation milestones, including the first seaplane takeoff, early metal frame designs, the first craft to cross the Alps, and flights over 10,000 feet in altitude. And air shows fueled public fascination and shifted perceptions from aircraft being just novelties to practical applications in commerce and warfare. So, for this mysterious flying object to sustain flight for so long at night amid Manhattan skyscrapers, well, it bordered on the impossible beyond even the era's most elite pilots and machines. And while this mystery was never solved, these sightings were a precursor to a global pattern. Ghost flyer reports scattered across the early 1930s, intensifying in Scandinavia, specifically Sweden, Norway, and Finland. These future ghost flyer flights were extraordinary. They were witnessed by hundreds, and mysterious objects soared low through brutal winter conditions, blizzards and fog, conditions that would normally doom conventional aircraft even at that time. And the eyewitnesses, from civilians to soldiers, described large aircraft-like forms circling in remote areas and projecting powerful searchlights as if probing the terrain, and often there was no engine noise. There were no takeoffs or landings observed either, and the aircraft, these UAPs, zigzagged in odd patterns before fading away. And so in this episode, I'll be exploring the question, were these ghost flyers just biplanes with astonishing flight characteristics with a death-defying pilot, or were they precursors of the UAPs of extraterrestrial origin? There are many good sources about the Scandinavian Ghost Fliers, but the most comprehensive is a series written in the summer of 1970 by John A. Neal, published in the Flying Saucer Review. These publications ask the question, what truly had invaded those frozen skies of Scandinavia? Let's delve into the chilling enigma of the Scandinavian Ghost Fliers of the 1930s. I'm MF Thomas, and this is my dark path through the fringes of the unexplained. The phenomenon began on Christmas Eve in 1933 with a report in the Dagens Nyheter newspaper from Keel, Sweden. Quote, a mysterious airplane appeared from the Botensea about 6 p.m., passed over Kalix, and continued westward. Beams of light came from the machine, searching the area. End quote. Imagine watching this flying object during a time when electricity was still only powering homes in larger cities. Watching these piercing beams turning night into day, casting an unnerving glow over those below. This first reported sighting gives us a hint for why the Scandinavian Ghost Fliers were so unnerving to the population, the military, and the government. The characteristics of the craft were simply bizarre. And after that Christmas Eve event, sightings surged in late December of 1933. On the 28th, in Lagmo, Norway, observers saw a high-altitude craft flying with 3 bright lights, but the details of the craft were observed by distance. Then, a few days later, on December 31st, near Gällivare, Sweden, drivers witnessed a low-flying craft at about 150 feet over the highway. Authorities admitted their confusion in a newspaper report. Quote, there were no known planes in the area. It was undoubtedly a stranger. End quote. Additional reports just after New Year's sharpened the public's anxiety. On January 2nd of 1934, a man, Olaf Hedlund, was visiting the town of Sorsele when he spotted a flying object at 3:45 a.m. under a full moon. An engine roar heralded the craft's arrival from the west, and it circled the railway station 3 times at about 1,200 feet in altitude. Overall, Olaf observed it fly for about 15 minutes, and to his eye, the craft was not a biplane, but appeared to have a single wing with an enclosed cockpit, and oddly, it bore no insignia. And amid all this peculiar flying behavior, Olaf was sure of one more fact, which made no sense at the time. The craft's engine halted multiple times mid-flight. Now, what might explain this phenomena where the engine sound appeared and then disappeared so dramatically? On the one hand, we might want to ascribe this as a feature of something extraterrestrial, but on the other, propeller engines are known to exhibit directional noise patterns. Unlike jet engines, where noise is predominantly louder from the rear due to exhaust, propeller noise is primarily generated by the blades interacting with the air, resulting in aerodynamic sounds that are often more intense forward of the propeller disc and in the plane of rotation. That means the sound can be louder when the aircraft is approaching head-on, but may seem quieter from behind or the sides. In experimental studies, directivity patterns show peaks at specific angles, like from the front or side, with variations of up to 9 decibels based on the aircraft's heading and setup. But interestingly, there does not seem to be a position where a propeller engine would make no noise whatsoever, only that the position of the plane would increase or decrease the amplitude of the sound. So, like most pieces of evidence, there is nothing definitive here, only more questions to answer. While governments equivocated, the mystery deepened and new reports emerged of ghost flyer UAPs making landings. On January 11th of that year, inhabitants in the village of Norsö, Sweden, described a bright light which was visible over the entire area. It was exceptionally strong and moved over the southern horizon. An employee of the Royal Telegraph Service watched the mysterious light land over the swamp. He reported the landing to police, who searched the swamp during a violent snowstorm, but found nothing. In another sighting, south of Norsö, witnesses saw a craft land on the ice. Investigators who braved the harsh winter weather found some markings on the ground, but nothing definitive that might explain what the craft was. And in Trondheim, Norway, 2 more landings were reported that same day, January 11th. In 2 separate descents, one UAP landed near an island outside of Rorvik, and the other at a place called Valog. The report from the area noted that witnesses heard a loud sound and saw a great beam of light coming from the craft. And after landing on the water, the machine remained quietly there for an hour and a half. Its light went out after it landed, but the general opinion of witnesses was that the object was still there. The second UAP took off 15 minutes after landing at Valog and vanished southward. And so while dozens of other reports also detailed landings, there was one incident where witnesses observed a flying object crash into the Norwegian Alps. The Swedish newspaper Dagens Nyheter reported that on the night of February 5th, quote, an unknown airplane has crashed or made an emergency landing on Fager Mountain. People in the valley watched the machine as it went down on the mountain. The next morning, the plane was still there, and 2 figures were visible beside it, apparently clearing away the snow. Moments later, the machine made 2 attempts to take off, but without success, end quote. Reporters who were tracking the story consulted the county police chief, whose words amplified the intrigue. He affirmed the account, noting that the crash had been witnessed by people living on both sides of the mountain. The chief shared the most disconcerting evidence with the reporters. Eyewitnesses swore that as the object crashed, there wasn't a whisper of an engine noise. There was nothing. Yet the very next day, witnesses heard mechanical noises from the mountain, like an engine trying to restart. A woman on a nearby farm was outside feeding the animals and reported hearing an unearthly noise. And soon others heard it too, a noise so alien, so out of place in that remote wilderness. And the day after the incident, 8 locals battled up the treacherous slopes of the mountain, their hearts pounding and searching for any sign of the craft. And they found nothing. No wreckage, no clues, just endless snow. But that night, at exactly 10 p.m., the mystery reignited. 4 witnesses spotted a craft slicing through the darkness, heading southwest straight away from Fager Mountain. Was it the same craft or another one searching for its downed comrade? Undeterred, 3 more search parties clawed their way up the mountain the next day, and then the Norwegian newspaper Tidens Teng dropped this bombshell, quote, Farmer Martinson of Fugel said that one of the patrols discovered 2 parallel traces in the snow, 300 to 400 meters northwest of the point where the craft had been seen. The traces were about 75 meters in length and 80 centimeters wide. The patrol also found footprints around the traces. The search will begin again tomorrow at dawn. End quote. Again, we're left to wonder, could the most advanced human aviation technology of this time create an aircraft that would survive a nighttime landing in mountainous terrain in the middle of a snowstorm and then lift off again? So what was it that vanished into thin air on that mountain? And what left those tracks. Once you've eliminated the possible, then no matter how unlikely the reason, you have to start accepting the impossible. But before ascribing the ghost flyer sightings to something otherworldly or extraterrestrial, let's exhaust every potential human explanation for these mysterious craft. Coordinated investigations by Swedish, Norwegian, and Finnish air forces cataloged hundreds of ghost flyer accounts. Sweden reviewed 487 reports and deemed 46 credible yet unexplained. Finland examined 111 and left 15 unexplained. So governments took the ghost flyer reports very seriously amid pre-World War II geopolitical tensions, and it included concern over the security of Scandinavian iron ore resources that were coveted by Germany and the Soviet Union. A 1934 memo from Swedish General Pontus Reuterward concluded evidence of unauthorized air traffic existed, but that the flights were untraceable with the technology of the day. Remember, radar was not invented until the late 1930s. Contemporary theories speculated that Soviet or German forces were conducting surveillance. However, in the early 1930s, the Soviet Union was underdeveloped and lacked a notable plane-building industry. Innovations like the Soviet Tupolev AN-T-20 bomber might account for some sightings, but its size and agility mismatched every description. And the Soviets were more concerned with using their craft for propaganda purposes than flying dangerously at night in blizzards. And after the collapse of the Soviet communist system, no declassified documents have ever emerged that hint at Soviet involvement. Germany was forbidden by the Versailles Treaty to construct warplanes or establish an air force. After Adolf Hitler took power in 1933, he began, secretly at first, to rebuild the Luftwaffe. And in that year, Germany had about 300 pilots, mostly World War I veterans. Hitler couldn't risk his meager force in a reckless adventure over Scandinavia in 1933 and 1934. So additionally, operations would have required extended supply lines, hidden bases for aircraft maintenance, and vast numbers of trained personnel. The distances that ghost flyers covered were vast, and in 1933, the best planes would have needed widespread Scandinavian landing fields for refueling and maintenance. And at the time, military bomber or torpedo biplanes, those best suited for reconnaissance, had ranges of 400 to 600 miles and endurances of 4 to 6 hours. Plus, later correlation of reports showed there were at least 6 unidentified flying objects aloft simultaneously, and if they were in fact aircraft, the supply chain required to support 6 simultaneous flights would have been extraordinary. Now, it's possible that Japan was responsible for these ghost flyer flights, but Japan at this time was engaged in a war with China and lacked reason or resources for Scandinavian reconnaissance halfway around the world. So could natural phenomenon account for the hundreds of sightings? Northern latitude residents know mundane phenomenon like the northern lights, comets, and meteors, and they wouldn't mistake falling stars for intense aerial searchlights or flying craft. Earlier in the flap, Scandinavian press suggested smugglers might be accountable, but Swedish and Norwegian investigators dropped this, as smugglers would need a vast, well-financed organization only to be flying prohibited goods into tiny Scandinavian towns without much of a market. Now, I've shared these factors to propose my hypothesis about these sightings, that human activity could not explain all of the ghost flyer activity in the Nordics in 1933 and 1934. No nation or organization had aviation technology, facilities, resources, or even the motivation for what thousands of witnesses observed. And with all of that, what are we left with? Could the source of the dozens of unexplained sightings be the same one responsible for the Foo Fighters that stalked Allied and Axis planes during World War II? Could it be the same source that now sends UAPs between water and sky in today's world? Of course, I have no answers, only speculation and only questions. Yet I am certain of something. There is more historical evidence than I ever imagined that anomalous objects have haunted our skies and oceans for centuries. If you're still watching or listening, thank you so much. I'm MF Thomas, and this is my dark path through the fringes of the unexplained. Until next time, my friends, good night.